since the beginning of this week, we're recording on a Thursday, so since Monday, 450 odd emails in my spam folder. When I say it's trashed, it's trashed.
Welcome to Email After Hours by SenderScore, powered by Validity.
We're your hosts. My name is Guy Hansen.
And I'm Danielle Gallant, and this is Email After Hours.
Hello, everyone. Hello, listeners. Today, it's a host-only episode, so you are stuck with Guy and I for a little bit. And I want to explain a little bit about how this episode came to be. So in our last recording with the great Karen Talavera, we kind of came up with a little bit of a seed for an episode, which was, you show me your spam folder and I'll show you mine. So Guy and I are going to pick out some of our favorite examples and critique exactly what we think caused them to be placed in spam in the first place.
You've got to understand, between Danielle and myself, we're signed up with literally thousands of email programs. So we do have a fairly unique insight into this particular topic. And we're going to share some of our personal observations and experiences in the spam folder. And I think, as you're going to hear, some of them are going to be 100% aligned with established conventional wisdom. And some of them are going to be completely unexpected. Let's start, Danielle, by talking about what we already know about spam folder placement, generally speaking. Because let's face it, there's hundreds of industry experts who claim to know what Gmail's secret sauce is, and that's great. But it's easy to lose sight of why mailbox providers apply spam filtering. It's not that they hate email marketing. We've heard directly from them that they don't. But their primary responsibility, their job one, is to protect their customers from malicious, harmful messaging. And they all say, if legitimate permission-based marketing messages get caught by their spam filters, it's nearly always because there are one or more aspects to those messages that makes them look spammy, based on the mailbox provider's real-life learnings from the billions of messages they process every day. You agree? What do you reckon, Danielle? What makes a message look spammy?
I agree. There are so many factors that determine whether or not a message looks spammy. We're going to talk about those with real examples later. But just to run through a couple of them. Engagement, whether it's positive like clicks or negative engagement like spam complaints, it plays an important role because it shapes the sender guidance that mailbox providers publish to help those legitimate consented programs avoid the spam folder. But it's not the only factor for sure. So full authentication, use of ARC records, TLS, an easy one-click unsubscribe, proper DNS setup, adherence to RFC standards, I could go on and on, appropriate processing of bounces, complaints, all of these things are critical. There are a couple other things that I think are maybe less considered, at least in the direct deliverability space, but they matter just as much. Branding consistency, segmentation of mail streams, so using certain IPs and domains for specific purposes. These are all strongly recommended by mailbox providers and, of course, by deliverability experts as well. I would also note that legal compliance is obviously a given. So make sure you're following all of the rules and regs for whichever region you're mailing to, or globally, ideally. And lastly, I will say mailbox providers also monitor metrics that only they have visibility into. So it's things that we simply just can't really see that really influence spam folder placement or inbox placement. Those are things like reads, forwards. They attach a lot of importance to these things, right, Guy?
Absolutely right. And you know what? I've always felt that spam foldering as a treatment of emails is something of a halfway house. Obviously bad emails going to be rejected outright. It's not even going to get as far as being accepted. The whole, is it going to inbox or is it going to junk conversation? They don't even get that far. So the way I see it is that when emails end up in a recipient's spam or junk folder, it's often because there's an element of doubt. From the mailbox provider perspective, those messages have definitely got some spammy attributes, but they could still be legit. So they let the subscribers decide for themselves, always assuming that they're checking their spam or junk folders in the first place, of course.
Yeah, let's talk about what we know from our experience as, email marketing experts. We've talked a lot about how deliverability is a little bit of an art and a science, but at the end of the day, we rely on data to draw conclusions and make informed decisions. And Guy, you have done some really interesting exercises lately. Will you tell our listeners about that?
I will. And this is where you're going to fully understand how much of a spam folder geek I truly am. But I basically took all of the email programs which are regularly featured in my spam or junk folders in my test accounts. And then what I did was I took our MailChart's competitive intelligence tool to overlay some additional metadata against these programs, things like subject line length and average image size embedded in the emails. And based on that, here's some of the things I'm now thinking about in terms of, what makes it more likely that those programs go to spam. So the first thing I'll say to you, it's a fairly obvious one. These programs all generate an average spam score, like a spam assassin score. And the average scores are only just below neutral, meaning that something like 20 to 30% of all the messages that these programs are sending score above that neutral point, meaning that they have at least some spammy attributes, and a really good starting point for senders would be just to run that spam test before they send those emails rather than learning about it afterwards, don't you think?
Agreed, 100%.
And then, I talk about having access to that subject line data, and interestingly, something like slightly over 50% of all the subject lines I analyzed exceed the recommended guideline of 35 characters. And the reason for that guideline is that's where subject line truncation starts to happen, especially at Gmail. And it's not to say that you should only ever send less than 35 characters. I've seen programs where long subject lines work really well because they can include more detail about what's going to be found in the email. But nonetheless, there's definitely a relationship going on here. And that goes hand in hand with pre-headers. I analyze that too. And round about a quarter of all the messages that were with this high propensity to arrive in spam aren't pre-header optimized, meaning that opportunity to either extend the subject line or make a secondary point is lost. And why would you want to do that, right?
Well, and I think too, we've had some conversations lately where we've heard anecdotally marketers are like, oh, we don't care about pre-headers anymore because they're being possibly rewritten by Apple's iOS 18 in the native mail app. But that's not all of your subscribers. It is still so important to have those pre-headers optimized.
Also found that around a fifth of the emails that I looked at exceed the recommended 100 kilobyte HTML size threshold. Why is it important? Because especially at Gmail, that's roundabout where message truncation starts to happen. And if your message is truncated and that recipient wants to opt out of their email, what they're going to do, they're scrolling down looking for the footing where they know the opt-out link is, and they can't see it anymore. So guess what? They're going to complain instead.
Preference enters too. Those links are always right next to each other. And if they can't opt down or select their desired message type, frequency, whatever, or opt out, of course, it's going to be a problem.
As a general observation, the messages generating the higher spam scores and the higher spam placement, they're just using more aggressive sales language, all of those tactics that are all caps and hyper urgency and too good to be true claims. By contrast, the lower scoring messages, the lower spam folder placement, adopting a far more conversational tone. They're using brand-centric and product-centric language rather than all that promotional hype, and making minimal use of discounts and urgency drivers, which isn't to say you've got to do that all the time. There's probably some balance in between. But, Danielle, I'm sure I'm not surprising you with anything I've just said there.
You're not surprising me, but now you have the nerdy data research to back it up. Okay. Is it time, Guy, to look at our own spam folders? Can you tell? I'm
I'm
excited to get
scared.
into this. You start. I want you to start. Are there any common trends that link the emails that you're finding in your spam folder?
Let's start off talking about our Gmail spam folders because, we know that's the biggest and probably most important one. And I've got to say, it's interesting because whenever anyone talks about deliverability at Gmail, it's, the regular thing you hear is that it's all about engagement. But you know what? I'm not entirely sure I agree. As we said, I'm signed up to literally thousands of email programs, and most of them it's so I can watch them. I hardly engage with any of them. And yet, very few of them go to spam. But conversely, I quite often see programs that I'm newly signed up with, so I'm firmly within that initial, in theory, most active 0 to 30-day window, and they go to junk. And, you look at the guidance that Gmail gives you, and it typically says something like, this message is similar to messages that were identified as spam in the past. Thanks, Gmail. That's super helpful. So what's making them look spammy? And I must just say that I am open to the idea that we shouldn't forget how far Google's reach extends. Google is almost Skynet, And, yes, you might not open that initial email, but perhaps 2 days later, you're using your Google search engine to go and search for the brand. And you use your Chrome browser to visit their website. And then maybe you check out some of their product videos on YouTube. You know what? If you're logged in, these are all behavioral data points that are generated by that initial email trigger, don't you think?
Agreed. We talked at the top of the episode about all of the different things that Gmail and other mailbox providers, but certainly Gmail, are using to determine whether a message is spammy. But to your point about engagement, I honestly think there's a math component, frankly. Like, there is volume over spam complaints. Because I'm with you, Guy. I'm subscribed to so many email programs where I know that I haven't opened, clicked, purchased in at least a year, and without fail, every day, those campaigns land in my inbox. So in my experience, smaller senders where they don't have as much wiggle room with volume, or new IPs and domains that are just as part of starting with the warming process, it's so much easier for them, those messages, to look volatile from a volume perspective or have a higher ratio of spam complaints than these big established bulk, 1 million a day, 10 million a day senders. I would also note that I think sender permanence is another factor. So domains that have been around for a while, years and years, make it to the inbox, make their messages land there, despite, frankly, straight up batch and blast, regardless of whether I engage. So sender permanence is definitely a factor, at least from what I've seen. What else do you see that has messages landing in your spam?
I've got to say that certainly at Gmail, anything failing authentication ends up in the spam folder. And just a word to our audience, think about those automated emails, because it's amazing how often that it happens with things like welcome emails. And when the big guns, Gmail, Yahoo, Microsoft, introduced their bulk sender requirements, everybody understood, got to have SPF, got to have DKIM, got to have DMARC, implemented it, but forgot about some of those evergreen messages. And so, now they send their welcome email, possibly the most important message that a program is ever going to send, and it goes to junk because they forgot to put the authentication in place for those messages. So, important lesson there. I think one thing that stood out to me, and this is a more subjective observation, is I see a high proportion of mostly text emails in my Gmail spam folder. And I'm actually wondering if there is a suspicion of senders that Gmail perceives as trying to game the system, take a specifically text-based approach to get their marketing emails into the primary tab rather than the promotions. And I'm actually working with one of our Australia customers at the moment, and they are really struggling with Gmail, and that is almost certainly what's going on. So, as I say, a little bit more subjective, but I think there's some truth there. And the other thing which I found myself worrying about, or at least wondering, worry is too strong a word, but are Gmail's auto annotations having unintended consequences? Because they introduced annotations a couple of years ago, and the idea was that, marketers can embed this code into their emails and it'll automatically show a code snippet or their preferred image in the inbox. And I think Gmail's got tired of waiting for marketers to start using it. In a lot of cases, they're just doing it anyway. And there's some unintended consequences. I've seen examples of Gmail auto-inserting annotations where the code snippet is showing an offer that's already expired. Or at the very least, the image they choose is like hardly relevant. And in both cases, they then overwrite that carefully crafted pre-header text that we were just talking about. And, sometimes you see some really eye-watching examples of it. I was looking at a shoewear brand, and they had this really clever subject line and pre-header combo where the subject line was fill in the, and then underscore, basically meaning fill in the blanks. And then the pre-header was basically saying, select the pair of chucks that you think are, most you. And that was completely lost because Gmail's auto annotations had completely overrid that. So the subject line was meaningless without it. So I'm rambling a little bit, but wondering if that's also contributing to Gmail spam placement unintentionally, because you're getting these examples of emails where you're looking at it and thinking, that's a bit crap. I'm just going to reach for the complaint button.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into this expired email.
Let me throw a question to you, Danielle, because I also found myself wondering if long friendly froms are a problem. And I know you got a few thoughts on this one.
I think, admittedly, I'm a bad person to ask. I'm not the right person to ask about whether friendly froms are a problem because my email address has basically been trashed by 15 years of signing up for every program. I don't even want to know how many times my address has been scraped or sold. My spam folder is a joke. I would like on the friendly from front, here are a couple that landed in my spam folder within the last couple of days. And by the way, when we were preparing for this episode, I stopped deleting messages from my spam folder just for the last couple of days. Since the beginning of this week, we're recording on a Thursday, so since Monday, 450 odd emails in my spam folder.
You're
So
truly
when I
signed
say
up to
it's
a
a
lot
joke,
of shit, aren't you?
when I say it's trashed, it's trashed. But okay, here are a couple of those friendly froms. And listeners, please don't judge me because these are not what I'm legitimately and intentionally signing up for. Okay. Emoji $, Cash App, emoji $, casino for you, bank check, apostrophe mega welcome bonus, my own name, Danielle Gallant, will show up. Emailing myself spam, and then full email addresses as the friendly from. So the short answer is yes. Emojis, underscores, special characters in the friendly from look spammy as hell, usually because they are spammy as hell. And also, it's worth noting that Google recently published some updates to their sender guidelines page around friendly from best practices. So it must be that some legitimate senders are trying to do strange things or experiment with the friendly from, I guess.
Although you didn't tell me you went to a casino last week, so maybe that one actually did work.
I did. Listen, I didn't. Okay, but I didn't sign up for any emails. Oh God!
Right, so let's have some fun and name some names, and let's select a most deserving of being in our spam folder and a least deserving sender that ended our spam folders. And here's mine. I think one of the brands I'm signed up to that almost certainly deserves to be there. Hate to say it. Nikki Beach, the sort of premium hotel operator, because their entire email is entirely image based. And so when it goes to your junk folder and the images aren't enabled, literally all you see is the email footer. There's nothing else there. So, at least you can unsubscribe. But no alt text either, which, we've been banging on this particularly for accessibility purposes. So, they probably deserve to be there. Least deserving, Spar, the supermarket chain. And, I guess you really need to see these, but let me just explain that, the email renders near perfectly, even when all the images are disabled. The brand color scheme comes across. And I think, possibly they're at fault for including a CTA that's located well down the email, probably below, the electric fold. But I looked at them and felt a bit sorry. I thought they shouldn't really be there. What about you, Danielle?
I feel like the electric fold is a band name that you just invented. What's interesting is that we have really different thoughts on why the messages that we're going to call out either do or don't deserve to be in our spam folders. You were focusing rightly on a lot of the attributes of the message. So whether it's image-based, whether it's alt text, whether branding comes across. For me, I'm not going to talk about the obvious spam that I mentioned earlier for my picks, but certainly legitimate senders. And mine is much more about the way that I've interacted with these senders or these brands. So obviously, I couldn't pick just one. I have two most deserving. This is a very local event venue and bar. It's called the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto. And I hope everybody knows it takes a lot for me to mark a message as spam at this point, knowing the impact that it has on email programs. But I have basically begged to get off of the Horseshoe Tavern's email list. I've unsubscribed multiple times, for sure. So it's not working. And I have marked messages as spam so many times out of just like incredulity that finally they have ended up landing in the spam folder. So unsubscribe's not working, and my own actions are just not being respected or processed by the brand or by that sender. So that's a big problem. That's going to land legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate messages in the spam folder. And also a special shout out for most deserving to the New York Times. I play Wordle as much as the next person. I really do. But I have been caught in a relentless win-back roundabout with the New York Times for maybe a year, at least a year. Every week, or maybe multiple times a week, I am getting a % off or $1 off. I swear I have tried to unsubscribe from them. And at this point, they are just sending repetitive messaging to someone who's not engaging, and they are landing in the spam folder. So I think they both deserve to be there. Least deserving for me is McDonald's Canada. To your point, Guy, about the aesthetic and the components of the actual HTML, the email looks good even with images off. I can see the branding. There's alt text applied. And I would love a free McChicken or something. They have all the necessary requirements in place. I saw that list on subscribe in their header. But I wondered, so I did sign up with Apple's Hide My Address. So there's a private relay situation happening. And I wondered if that had anything to do with the spam foldering that we're seeing for them. But I don't think they deserve to be there.
Interesting. Okay. Let's talk about Outlook. And I think it's widely acknowledged and understood that Microsoft's inboxes are definitely the toughest to get your emails delivered to. When we published our benchmark report earlier this year, something like 1 in every 4 marketing emails that go to Hotmail or Outlook end up in junk. And, we also know from our own data that Microsoft accounts generally generate higher average complaint rates. And I think this is partly because of the Outlook interface. The list unsubscribe functionality isn't exposed in the same way that it is for Gmail and Yahoo. Outlook also offers sweep functionality. So, you can basically have rules-based moving of emails to another folder, including to your junk folder. So you can basically just set up a rule that moves everything ad infinitum to junk. And don't forget also about SRD, sender reputation data. We talk about it often, where real life subscriber feedback is solicited by Microsoft, and it plays an important role in inbox versus spam placement decisions. And finally, just don't forget that authentication failures, since Microsoft introduced their version of bulk sender requirements, are blocked outright at this mailbox provider. So the treatment for non-compliance is actually harsher than the other major mailbox providers. And back to our previous comments, most deserving, probably Fresh, the beauty products company. And like their brand, like their products, but you know what? They are a seriously high frequency sender. And, they often send me more than one message per day. And sometimes they send exactly the same message twice a day. No alt tags for their images. There's just not a huge amount of thought going into providing me, with a nice, personalized, thoughtful subscriber experience. They absolutely deserve to be in my junk folder. Least deserving, I think the one I felt sorry for as I was going through this exercise was Magnum Ice Cream. And they had a particularly awesome use of alt text. And it literally read, two people eating ice cream with water splashing around them on a sunny day. You know what? Even if I didn't see that image, I can absolutely picture it. And
I can see it.
I think they were possibly undone by a really weird cookies notice in their email, and possibly a lack of association, because Magnum is owned by Unilever. They're also part of Ben and Jerry's. And depending on how you came onto the mailing list, you might be looking at them thinking, why am I getting it? But it was a shame. I don't think they deserve to be there.
Not with alt text like that. I will say on the Outlook / Hotmail front, I do have an old personal Hotmail email address, but frankly, I log into it once a year. Maybe it's a very, very secondary address. And to your earlier point, if engagement were the most significant factor, everything should be ending up in my spam folder at Outlook, but it simply isn't. So I'm getting a lot of stuff in there. It's not engagement is not the only metric, especially for Microsoft. While we're at it, Guy, there's another mailbox that I want to ask about, and that is your corporate spam folder. We don't want to leave our B2B folks out. So what's happening in your junk folder with your Validity address?
I need to be careful here so I don't have to explain some of the stuff I'm signed up with on my corporate address. We often talk about how B2B senders have it even tougher. Not only have they got to navigate the spam filtering of their hosting platforms, so that's usually Office 365 or Google Apps, but there's also usually some kind of third-party filter involved in the mix as well. So think Proofpoint or Mimecast, and they've got to deal with all of those requirements too. And I've got to say, most of the messages I see in this folder, they're prospecting emails. And it constantly amazes me that businesses don't understand the damages that their SDRs are causing, banging out their generic, poorly targeted sequences using the corporate domain. You know what? Microsoft themselves published some great guidance aimed at businesses like ours and others, going, if you're going to use your corporate channel like that, be really, really careful, because the same rules apply. If you're sending out those crappy prospecting emails, what do you do when you receive one of them? I'll tell you what I do. I mark them as junk, and that's it. And not good for a business's reputation. I think the other key observation I'd make with the B2B emails that I receive is that the single other biggest cause of them being in my junk folder is broken authentication, because their ARC records haven't been set up, authenticated receiver chain. And it gets a little bit nerdy, but basically ARC preserves your original authentication credentials, including your DMARC. But if an email gets routed through a Mimecast for filtering, and then gets forwarded from Mimecast to me, that authentication can be broken because, the sending details you see are Mimecasts, not the original senders. So if you don't have your ARC records in place, and I'm not going to give a detailed explanation of that today, you can Google it, set them up, because that's a serious cause of junk foldering for B2B emails. I think other observations, a lot of the programs have seriously volatile sender reputation scores. I think often because they're not daily senders. Sometimes it's like a monthly newsletter, and you can't just like ramp up the volume and then ramp it down again for another 29 days. And targeting's poor as well. I mean, a lot of them just don't seem to even know that I'm a business user, or that in my case, I'm not based in the US, but they're inviting me to sort of events, to sort of, after hours drinks in New York next week.
Everybody's based in the US, aren't they?
So back to our winners and losers prizes, our orchids and onions. Most deserving to be in my corporate spam folder, probably Omnia Hotels. We're going to an event with them in November. I've booked early. I haven't stayed there yet, but they're already sending me emails like, hey, dreaming of your next vacation? No, I mean, let's get the current one over first. I know, right? Although I'm a business user, back to my previous point. And, you look at some of the email header data, Microsoft gives you the spam confidence level, the SEL score. It's an 8 on a scale of 0 to 9, where 9 is the worst you can possibly look. Their bulk confidence level score, which is basically indicative of complaints, they're scoring a 5. That's seriously bad. So, no surprises that the Omni's emails are junk foldering. Least deserving, and again, sort of staying with the hotel theme, I felt a bit sorry for Four Seasons. I stayed with them in Austin recently. They sent me a really nice follow-up email after my stay, and details of more stuff I can do in Austin if I go back, and a nice little interactive quiz to explore where else I might want to stay with them in future, promote their preference center to ensure I receive the right mix of messages in future. They're doing a great job, and it's probably unfortunate that they ended up in junk.
Yeah, I went through this morning before our recording to look at my Validity junk folder. There was an email in there from a company called Cloudinary. It seems related to the industry for sure, but I have no idea when I've interacted with them or what I maybe downloaded from them or what. So we've talked about before, not recognizing the brand or remembering that I've signed up is a problem. It's probably going to get you into the spam folder. But I wanted, on the B2B front, I wanted to talk about / go on a rant about like cold emails, like for a second, back to your point about SDR. About a year ago, for the listeners, Guy and I were supposed to attend a B2B event in Miami. Now, for whatever reason, circumstances, we didn't end up attending. But I thought it would be fun to talk about the emails that we received following that event date. So, like I said, Guy and I we didn't speak. We didn't attend. We were supposed to. And then, how with your good friends, eventually your text thread just becomes like me sending emoji, like a meme or emoji, like it just becomes image based. And there was a period where for a couple weeks, Guy and I were just sending back and forth these screenshots of emails we got, and they always went something like this. Hi, Danielle, or hi, Guy. We loved your presentation in Miami last week. It was amazing. We wanted to introduce you to this product that we have. Or, hey, Guy and Danielle, fascinating research you presented at your insert conference here. And it was just like the sales pitches, the cold emails based on nothing, not even a little bit of research. So that's not going to land you in the inbox.
I responded to one of those. It was like, hey, thanks for the feedback. Which bit of my presentation did you like the most? And strangely, I never heard from them again.
Shocker, Guy.
Oh, man. What a conversation, Danielle. Let's wrap it up with a quick, fast summary because, I hate to say it, but already, the next Black Friday, Cyber Monday, holiday season, is almost upon us. So, what do we think have we learnt from today's conversation? What are going to be the biggest factors this year that are going to be sending all those Black Friday emails to junk?
Yeah, I think for sure a shift toward tougher enforcement of sender requirements, or maybe we'll get a surprise drop of new sender requirements before Black Friday and the holiday season comes. So with this tougher enforcement, you just mentioned a little bit earlier about Microsoft outright rejecting messages that fail authentication standards. So more rejections, more temporary fails are going to be moving to permanent fails. So those stricter rules are going to start having an impact on senders that just haven't really paid attention or haven't seen those ramifications in the past.
100% in agreement. I think one that I'm also thinking about already is over-reliance on AI. Yeah, we touched on this earlier in the conversation, but, relying on it in a way that produces off-brand subject lines and copy and spammier language, those big discounts, those time-sensitive promotions, overdone pressure and urgency. And it's important. We published our state of email report a couple of months ago. And one of the questions which consumers are asked was, when you're deleting emails, why? And about 30% of them said, we delete them based only on the sender name. That was enough. Another 50% said we delete based on either the content of the subject line or the pre-header. Get those wrong, you're not even going to get your email opened. You've fallen at the first hurdle. And I think, we talked earlier, subject lines, there's still room for that human touch. And, over-dependence on AI is going to get your emails deleted. Any more, Danielle?
Yeah, I've got one more. We talked about it already. Economic factors are going to be squeezing discretionary spending, especially this year as a seemingly endless stream of tariffs continue to be imposed upon consumers and people who are spending. So naturally, if subscribers are not as likely to purchase, they may not be as likely to engage with messages. And that can create a little bit of a cycle where we may start seeing some increased spam folder placement and possibly just lower ROI from email.
And I'm going to recycle an old one, but it's a good one because we hear it from all of our mailbox provider partner friends at Microsoft and Gmail and Yahoo. When you're setting up those big bulk sends, don't set them up to go out at the top of the hour, because guess what? Everybody else does the same. And we've heard from those partners that maybe 70% of all the inbound traffic that they process happens in the first 10 minutes of every hour. So their lives are harder. They've got to process more emails. What do? They prioritize, they throttle, they defer. Maybe they send a few more to the junk folder. So get a little bit smart and set up those big sends to go out at 1:15 or 10:02, or even like a completely random number. And you'll benefit because you're not going to be competing with the other 70% of the traffic, and you're going to be more likely to get your emails delivered faster and to the inbox. So I'm not going to say you heard it here first because we've trotted this one out before, but it's just so obvious. Do it.
Guy, I feel like we should make this episode an annual tradition or something. This was so fun. And now, as we wind down, I fear the Horseshoe Tavern reaching out to me. Anyway, to our
Hopefully I'll
listeners,
offer you a free beer.
I hope. Listen, all will be forgiven. I'll move you to the inbox. Be sure to tune in next time, everybody, and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.org for more resources to help you become a stronger sender.
And this is going to sound funny, given we didn't have any guests today, but we do love our guests, we promise. And we quite like having with them on our regular episodes. So we're always looking out for new ones. So if you guys listening to us today want to come and join us for an upcoming episode, drop us a comment, ping us on LinkedIn. You can fill out the guest form that's linked in the show notes, and like us at the top of every episode. And you can also email us at emailafterhours@validity.com. It's that easy. Or head to the link in the show notes to send us an audio message. We'd love to discuss a few more of your questions in future episodes.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Be sure to tune in next time and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.com for loads more great resources to help you become a stronger sender.
To all you sleepless senders out there, thank you for joining us after hours, and see you next time.